So, we had the great revelation last time. We discovered that the Philistines are the Greeks, or they were originally, or at least some of them were originally, from the Greek mainland, the culture of which in the late Bronze Age we call Mycenaean. And you're looking at an early Mycenaean here, the gold funerary mask of some noble Greek tribal chief from the latter part of the 15th century BC from the site of Mycenae. This is the mask that Heinrich Schliemann discovered back in the 19th century and declared the face of Agamemnon, the great hero who led the Greeks to Troy. So this is the visage made by the Greeks, and this, of course, is the representation of the Peleset, one of the tribal groups of the Sea Peoples, as recorded on the great pylons of the funerary temple of Ramses III at Medinet Habu, opposite Thebes. And we learned last time that the Peleset were the people who give their name to this region of southern Greece that we now call Philistia. That's parts of the southern coastal plain and the Shvela. And they move in a major way and resettle the area. So the area was already well occupied by Canaanites, and we saw some of those Canaanites in the rendition on the Cour de la Cachette from the latter part of the 13th century under the reign of Merneptah. We saw the relief of the destruction of the city of Ashkelon, the siege and the destruction of the city of Ashkelon, inhabited by Canaanites there. So into this region where Canaanites are living moved the Philistines, and they displaced population and they reorganized the way that the settlement is. So now it's a very highly urbanized settlement with many more large sites and many fewer medium and small sites as compared to that breakdown in the late Bronze Age. The area of Philistia is not the only area that sees new settlement in the 12th and 11th centuries BCE, which are the 2 centuries that we call, in archaeological terms, Iron I. 12th and 11th centuries are Iron I. Those are the centuries we've really been focusing on. The Central Hills, the regions of Samaria and Judea, along with the Jordan River Valley immediately alongside the Central Hills, and also Transjordan, no dots for which are on this map, but they could be, also experience an enormous change in settlement pattern of a very different sort than what we saw in Philistia. In the Central Hills, there are areas that were completely unsettled in the late Bronze Age. In the area of Judea, the ancient tribal territories of Judah and Benjamin, down here, the southern Central Hills, there were 0 settlements recorded by survey archaeologists combing the landscape throughout the 70s and the 80s, looking for sites. There are no late Bronze Age sites in this region. In the area of the northern Central Hills, which is the area of Samaria, and you're looking at a kind of view of parts of that zone down here, there were 36 sites, some a little bit larger, some a little bit smaller, in the late Bronze Age. In the Jordan Valley, in the late Bronze Age, there are 20 sites, and in this area of Transjordan, biblical Moab, Edom, Gilead, there were 32 sites. So late Bronze Age settlement in this region as a whole, 88 sites. Not nothing, not huge. Iron I experiences the most dramatic change of settlement pattern of any area of this land. In Judea, the southern Central Hills, from 0 to 70 sites. Survey archaeologists have found 70 sites in this region. In Samaria, from 36 to 249. In the Jordan River Valley, double from 20 to 40, and in Transjordan, an astonishing from 32 to 319. This is actually the most densely newly settled area of this region. Yes, sir.
In the readings, I was wondering, is there any kind of definite land border between Samaria and Judea?
There is no land border between Samaria and Judea. It's one continuous highland stretch. There are, because it's mountainous, there are some more peak areas and some more valley areas. And there is a sort of natural valley-ish area, not down the way you would go all the way to the Jordan River Valley, but just there are rivers that cut through there, and so it's a little bit lower. And that is the traditional land boundary between biblical and modern Judea and Samaria. So there are small topographical distinctions, but compared to the rest of this whole area, the Central Hills are one consistent longitudinal zone from just south of the Jezreel Valley. You see here Megiddo, that marks the edge of the Jezreel, all the way down. And then the hills just get higher as they get down into the south, into the area of what was known biblically as the wilderness, where there's very little water and the settlement is even sparser. But all of this is one huge highland zone. So this astonishing buildup is not accompanied by a phenomenon that we see in the area of Philistia, urbanization. That is to say, urbanized large sites, cities. There are no cities. 93% of these 678 sites, you do the math, I didn't do it, but anyway, that's a lot, are small. 1 hectare, unwalled, that is to say, unfortified. What I think today we would call a hamlet. I'm not even sure we would call it a village. Very small, unwalled settlements. 93% of these new sites fall into that category. Let us take a look at what constitutes these new small sites. You're looking here at an aerial view of an enormous mound, the mound of Ai, A-I, Hebrew word that means the ruins. Ai is a famous site in biblical accounts because it's one of the great cities, according to the book of Joshua, that is destroyed by the Israelites in the conquest, in biblical lore. Ai is indeed a big city from the 3rd millennium BC, from the early Bronze Age. This huge mound was one great big city with a gigantic fortification wall and an acropolis. And this area right here is the acropolis of the ancient 3rd millennium BCE, early Bronze Age city of Ai. That city was abandoned sometime in the latter part of the 3rd millennium, around 2200 BCE, long before any of us have started to talk about any of these things. 1,000 years before the start of Iron 1. It was just a great big hill. There were ruins visible, remains of the fortification wall from the early Bronze Age and so forth, but nobody lived there. In Iron 1, in the 12th century, a small settlement was established here on the Acropolis, only on the Acropolis, and you're looking here at the remains of some of the houses on the Acropolis at Ai. Incidentally, I don't know why this works sometimes and not others. None of these settlements, because these settlements are all, or practically all, brand new, all these small new Iron 1 settlements, there's no warfare or battle or destruction connected with any of them. People just move in to these spots. Nobody was living there before, so there's no need to have any fight about it. A new settlement is just established there. So here's a plan of the Iron 1 remains at Ai. this building here, which looks pretty substantial and is pretty substantial, is the early Bronze Age temple. That is the 3rd millennium building, which was in Iron 1 repurposed as part of this new settlement. And new little partition walls were built inside here. But for the most part, the settlement comprises 2 or 3 houses attached together to make a couple little compounds, 1, 2, 3, separated from each other by a little bit of space. So there's maybe 8 or 10 families living here all together, and most of the settlements are like this. No more than 3 to 6 little compounds strung around in the area. Each of the compounds comprises a pillared house. That is a house that has some columns separating off part of the main room with a few other rooms around it. The plan here at I is a little oops, go back. It's either good or bad. Is a little sketchy, so we'll look here at a better preserved example of one of these sorts of houses at the site of Tel el-Umeiri, which is in modern-day Jordan, Transjordan, one of those 378 new Iron 1 settlements in Jordan. And you see how these houses look. They are called in the parlance, and I think Liz and Beth called them this in the reading that you have, 4-room houses. They don't always have 4 rooms, but they usually do. And here's how the 4 rooms tend to work out. There's one long room at the back. That's back here. And then there is either an open area separated by 2 rows of pillars, in this case here. So that's 1, 2, 3 rooms, or I guess they're counting the other way, 1, 2, 3 rooms. And sometimes, instead, this is a solid wall with a doorway in it. So there's 1 room, 2 rooms, a 3rd living area, and a 4th living area. The columns, of course, would have held up the roof beams. And where you have columns and then open area, you've got some area that was covered and some area that was open. The open area would have been used for cooking, and the covered area could have been for setting up equipment for grinding or weaving, something that you don't want to have necessarily exposed to the elements, but you want to be able to have light to see by. So the columns allow light to come into that area. The closed rooms, for example, this one back here at Tel el-Umeiri, could have been used for sleeping. They could have been used for storage, and in the case at Tel el-Umeiri, there were a lot of jars, storage jars, found in one corner. The houses are sizable. They aren't too tiny. You see these fellows sitting around here, giving you a sense of the scale of this one. They range from about 40 square meters to 80 square meters. If you calculate, as people who do this sort of math do, about 10 square meters per person living space, that wouldn't be today where we all take up a lot more room, but that would be back then. That's about 4 to 8 people per house. In other words, a small extended family. When you consider the arrangement of the compounds, a couple of these 4-room houses, and then a little bit of space, and then another couple of 4-room houses, you have little settlements of a few extended families each. Inside the houses, all these 678 Iron 1 settlements, for the most part, have the same sort of finds associated with them. Many large storage jars. This is another one of these Iron 1 sites from the area of southern Samaria, that is the southern part of the northern part of the Central Hills, the site of Shiloh. And this is an assemblage of pottery from one of those houses. So you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 huge storage jars. Their capacity is about 1.3 cubic meters. That's sizable. Cooking vessels, including this really odd thing, which is probably not your standard issue. I mean, I know it's not your standard issue, cooking pot. So cooking vessels, smaller jars, bowls, very plain, locally made, but not poorly made, very well made. Thin walls, evenly potted, hard-fired, and the storage jars are remarkably consistent. A very, very consistent type in terms of how it's produced, the size that it is, and even the type of rim that it is. This type of rim, with its sort of short neck and its little ring right at the bottom of the neck, is called, in the parlance, a collared rim store jar. Because you can think of the top of a shirt with a collar. I didn't actually wear this on purpose today for this, but it's handy. You know, you have a little band around your neck. So that's what these jars all have on top, is a little band at the top of them, hence the name, collared rim store jars. Inside these houses also, in addition to storage vessels, many cooking vessels and bowls, all locally made, fair amount of grinding stones, grinding implements, and you see here an adorable little Old Kingdom Egyptian statuette, which I just show you because it's good to have some people in the pictures every so often, even if they're stone people from 3000 BC. Showing you what to do with a grinding stone, in case you did not know. You get your wheat from the field. These settlements are usually on the tops of hills, and the lower parts of the hills and the fields around all of the settlements are terraced. And you're looking here at a modern-day set of terraced hills in the area of Samaria. You need terraces because you have to be able to plow on flat ground. So when you have hill slopes, you need to construct, and it's a lot of work, terraces, in order to, I wonder if there's a way I can make this lower. Maybe I'll just lower it. You need terraces in order to be able to have little fields that you can plow on. And then once you get your grain, you have to turn it into flour, otherwise it's of no use to you, and you have to grind it. And lots of grinding stones are found inside these houses. So these small, unwalled settlements are really like farmsteads. A few extended family units. Inside of each, all the accoutrements you need for agricultural self-sufficiency. They are very egalitarian in the sense that all these settlements have the same setup. Same sort of houses, same size. There are little details differently. So here, for example, the Tel El-Umeiri house has three slots and then one long room, and here is one that just has 2, and then here's one with 3. But you get the idea that they're mostly the same. In addition to these houses, 40 to 80 meters square, and the material inside them, there are plastered cisterns. You see the logo here for cisterns. There are lots of cisterns associated with all of the houses, and the cisterns are coated with waterproof plaster. Because there's one big advantage to this region in terms of settlement, and that is that it gets a lot of rain, and so it's easy to farm here. You may recall from the original topographical description that we talked about, this is well above the 300 millimeter a year rainfall isohyet, And there's no problem with farming regularly. I mean, there can be years of drought, but basically this is fine area for farming. But settlements on the tops of the hills, you're not going to have access to springs, which are going to be at the base of the hills. You're not going to have easy access to water. So you need to store water. And the way that water was stored was in these plastered cisterns. And in addition to plastered cisterns, there are also other installations inside the houses, hearths and ovens. So these are very comfortable, well-equipped, well-made houses, and the goods inside them are well-made and plentiful for this very simple life, which probably was based on a combination of farming and raising animals. There are lots of bone remains, faunal remains from these houses, and the faunal remains are predominantly sheep, goat, some cattle. That's it. Here's another one of these settlements, right on the edge of the Samaritan Plateau, is Betsarta. And you see here another one of these houses. Again, you get the sense from this person standing in the house of the comfortable size of the houses. And here is a plan of the settlement at Isbetsarta in the 11th century BC. Many, many, many silos. That is to say, these aren't plastered cisterns for water. These were probably for the storage of grain. And they surround, there are about 43 of them, and they surround the little four-room houses that you see. This one with the plan very similar to that at Umeiri, with one long room and then one wide room and three long rooms, and here just three long rooms in that settlement. Isbetsarta is an important site not because it provides us with yet another example of a couple four-room houses packed together around some silos, although that's nice to have another example, but because in one of those silos was found an ostrakhan, which is to say a pottery sherd with writing on it. And the pottery sherd is a broken off fragment of a jar that seems to have been used as a kind of scrap piece of paper once the jar had been broken. And etched on it are 4 squiggly, poorly executed lines of Proto-Canaanite alphabetic script, not spelling anything, and with many of the letters repeated here, for example, as if the person who is doing the etching here is practicing. And then at the bottom, a 5th line, a little bit better executed. You can see it here. And in letters a little bit larger. And this line is what we call an abecedary. An abecedary is the alphabet written out in order, like the ABCs. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, blah, 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 blah. 22 letters of what come to be the Hebrew alphabet, but the Hebrew alphabet, of course, was derived from the Proto-Canaanite alphabet. That's where they got it from. And these letters are a little bit more developed, that is to say, closer to what Hebrew looks like than the letters on the Lachish or at Sarabat al-Kadim, but they are the same alphabet. The letters are just changing slightly in form. A very amazing discovery, which I just put here because some of you may have read about it last year. In 2008, Yossi Garfinkel, an archaeologist at Hebrew University, began excavating at this site, not too far from Jerusalem, sort of on the way to Hebron, Khirbet Piafa. And he found a fortified site that is late Iron 1 or early Iron, very early Iron 2A. So we'll actually come back to Hirvit, K-alpha, as soon as we start Iron 2A. So it's a walled settlement. It's a one-period settlement dating from around the middle of the 11th century to the very beginning of the 10th century. And an enormous ostrakhan, 5 inches square, with 5 lines of script was found there a year ago, this past summer. And unlike the Isbet Sarta abecedary, this actually says something. This seems to be like a letter. A full publication hasn't come out yet. There have been lots of articles in the newspaper. I think I put links to this on the website. I'll double check when I go back, and if I have links to it, and if I didn't, I will put them on there so that you can read all about it. Very exciting. So anyway, so you see a picture of it here, and it's a good thing that Yossi's fingers are actually pointing to one of the lines because you would not actually be able to see the letters otherwise. But they spell words, and the actual text, like I say, hasn't been published yet, but the epigrapher who's studying it has allowed us to know that the words king, judge, servant, and don't are all legible. You can put those in any order you want. This is like one of those magnetic refrigerator word puzzles. A few too many nouns. Could use a couple more verbs, but all right. That's what we got so far. Anyway, so alphabetic script at these sites. The silos are made out of stone, although they are partially buried in the ground. So they're partially carved out of bedrock, and then the upper parts are stone walls. Surveys throughout the Central Hills have discovered almost exclusively settlement sites. Just about all of those 678 sites are places that people lived. In none of those domiciles is there any evidence whatsoever of any kind of ritual or cult activity, unlike the Philistines, where Ashdoda figurines, those little enthroned ladies, were found in houses. In none of these sites in the Central Hills is there any evidence of cult. But 2 sites that look to be cult sites have been found in the region where these new Iron 1 settlements occur. And this is one of them at the far northern end of that territory on a rise in northern Samaria, looking out towards the Jezreel Valley. And this site is called, the reason for which you'll see in a moment, is called the Bull site, B-U-L-L. Doesn't have another name. The Bull site is on, as I say, the top of a rise in the Gilboa mountain range, and from it you have pretty good views in a lot of directions. You can see, if you look to the east, easily you might want to get your map out and put this site on it, actually. So that this topographic stuff that I'm about to tell you has some meaning, because you now see where the site is on the map. Okay, so we're at the northern end of the Central Hills, about 2/3 of the way down in terms of east-west, down the Jezreel Valley between the coast and the Jordan River, or maybe half. If you are standing on the rise so you got this? Do you see where we are? Yes, that's good. Mm-hmm. You have to be not in the yellow, but on the green in the topographic map, because you're up, not down. Okay, you guys with me? from this site, if you look due east, you can see the mountains of Gilead in Jordan, across the Jordan River. If you look north, you can see the two highest peaks in Lower Galilee and the Golan, respectively, Mount Tabor and Mount Hermon. If you look west, you can see Mount Carmel. It's about there. So it's a site with a commanding view. In the larger area, there have been a lot of these small Iron One sites discovered. But on the mountain in particular that this site is, there are no settlements. So there are no settlements immediately in the vicinity of this site. But there are lots of settlements in the region around. So one day, in the mid-1970s, an army sergeant was on guard, an Israeli army sergeant was on guard here, and he was just sitting there looking in all these directions because this height, in addition to having good views in antiquity, has good views today, and so it was strategic. And he looked down at the ground, and he was sort of scuffing around because he was really bored, and he saw what looked like an eye looking out at him. And he scuffed around a little more, and he found this bronze bull, which is 5 inches high, 7 inches long, and analysis has shown is made of 92% copper, 4% tin, and 4% lead. And he's a lot of people in Israel live in these agricultural settlements that are called kibbutzim. And this army sergeant, in fact, lived at a kibbutz. And so he took the little bull back to his kibbutz the next time that he was going home, because most kibbutzim, including the one that he came from, have a sort of resident archaeologist. And I really like this story a lot because the kibbutz that this army sergeant happened to be a member of was Kibbutz Shamir, which is way up in the north and is the kibbutz that I first had anything to do with when I started working on my graduate work in northern Israel. Because the archaeologist at that kibbutz, Moshe Kagan, was the person who really discovered the site that I ended up working on for my dissertation. So anyway, Moshe Kagan is the archaeologist at Kibbutz Shamir, and then Yossi took the sergeant, took his little bull to Moshe, and Moshe put it in this little museum that he had. Almost kibbutzim have these little museums of archaeological stuff. And the archaeologist Ami Mazar was up there one day. Lots of archaeologists tend to go and they look through various local museums periodically to see if there's anything new that's come up. And he saw the bull and he got pretty interested and he asked about it. And so Yossi took Ami to the site. And Ami did a little serious, organized investigating, and here's what he found in the area where the bull came from. A stone circle about 70 feet in diameter, rough-hewn, essentially unworked. It's not really rough-hewn, but essentially unworked stones, and you see one here. So these stones here are part of this circle. Apparently a sort of entry area into the circle. A few flat-lying stones once you got into the entry area, which might be a kind of paved area. And one especially large flat stone that was hewn. That is to say, it had been worked to make it more even, but not in a very systematic way, just partially. And the size of that big flat stone, 4 feet long, 3 feet wide, 1 3/4 feet thick. So very, very sizable. That huge, flattish stone might have originally been a standing stone, or it might have been intended to be a kind of platform or altar. Very, very little else was found at the site. Some fragments of Iron I pottery, no other period. That's what allows us to attach the site to this period. And some ashes mixed in with dirt, a few fragments of bone, but not sufficiently large to be identified. So this looks to be some sort of occult site, and the deity in question seems to have an animal manifestation of a bull.
Sorry, how do we know that the bull is a manifestation of deity? Why can't it be like a votive offering? Like, I'm not rich enough to give you a whole cow if you take one.
It's possible that in this context it was a votive in either the true sense of a votive, that is, as a fulfillment of a vow or as in some sort of a gift. But if it was a votive, one would like to see other examples of such behavior, and we don't. Votive activity, for it to be something that people could have even had the idea of doing, needs to be something that we see common practice of. In other cultures, we see it as a practice. We see gifts, or nice things, luxury objects or imported objects or specially crafted objects found in shrines or in temples. But there's no indication of anything else like that here. And the other reason that most people think that this is a manifestation of a deity and not an offering to a deity is because we have evidence for other bull manifestations of deities in this area and north of it too, in Syria, for example, from the Bronze Age. So it's not impossible. Any question like this, these are always good questions. Why do we deduce this and not that? Why couldn't it be that? And with this field, all you can ever do is say, well, what are the other examples like this? What is the most logical interpretation of those other examples? If you want to assume something else, you just need to come up with a reason that will counter the other evidence. Hold on one second, Nicole.
Were there any other bulls found, or just this one?
At this site? No, just this. This is the only bull from the bull site. Nope. Yep. Yes. Hold on, Howard.
Do you know how many people came to this to worship?
There are
area?
in the surrounding area, there are many settlements. I don't know the exact number in the particular this piece of the Manasseh survey, but there are probably 20 or 30 settlements within walking distance of this site, and each of those settlements would have been pretty small.
They don't come here.
Well, this is a site sort of centrally located in a cluster of settlements, but not directly linked to any one settlement. So you may assume that. I too would assume it, but I'm just saying that's the evidence, and then the second step is the conclusion that you draw from it. Somebody, Beth, Steph. Yeah. The bull was found someplace right around there. Mm-hmm.
What kind of pottery was found? You said it was iron one, but was it anything special?
No. There is no special Iron 1 pottery. You just saw a picture of Iron 1 pottery, those jars and those cooking pots. That's iron one pottery. They're little bowls, jars, and cooking pots, juglets, jugs, locally made, undecorated. No, not here, not at this site. I mean, I think that there were some handles, jar handles, and so maybe originally people would have brought some jars, although I don't know that there's any evidence for those gigantic store jars here. I will put an article about this site, the article that Ami Mazar wrote in BASOR, the Bulletin of the American Schools of Oriental Research, on the WebVista site. So if you want to read every detail about this site, you can. Were there more? Laura, you didn't have more questions? All right. One other cult site, or anyway, not settlement site, something else going on, was found in this area of the Central Hills. Much further south, so the bull site up about there. This is the top of Mount Ebal. Mount Ebal is the largest height in southern Samaria. It's 3,000 feet above, feet or meters? Feet. 3,000 feet above sea level. Again, like with the bull site, the survey in this region, and I'm actually standing on Mount Ebal. This is my picture. I'm standing on Mount Ebal taking a picture of the surrounding countryside so you can get a sense of it. In the surrounding area, so these are upland valleys of the Central Hills. In the surrounding areas, 160 small iron one sites discovered, but on Mount Ebal in particular, which is a huge mountain, 6 square miles worth of area, no sites, no settlement sites whatsoever. So like the bull site, in the midst of settlement sites, but not connected to any one particular settlement site. Like the bull site, when you're standing on Mount Ebal, you have a good view. On a clear day, such as the one in the picture here, if you look to the south, I'm not looking to the south in this picture. If you look to the south, you can see the hills around Jerusalem. If you look to the west, you can see the Mediterranean. You can see the mountains of Gilead, ancient Jordan, across the Jordan. So a very dramatic site. And on the top of the mountain is this stone structure. 9 by 8 meter platform. I apologize for toggling between meters and feet. I just, I get these measurements out of the various reports and articles and chapters and write them down in my notes, and I do not bother to get all consistent with you. But I do try to get it straight here. So anyway, this happens to be meters. 8 by 9 meter, so almost square stone edifice. A ramp that is 23 feet long and 3 feet wide. I don't know why I have feet here, meters there, but that's what I got. 3 feet. The platform itself takes up about half of the area, and in front of this enclosure, and inside the 2 squares to either side of the ramp was a fill of ash, earth, stones, broken pottery, and a lot of burnt bone. There were also some whole vessels found buried. So here's the top of a jar. Not one of those gigantic jars, but a smaller one. This stone carved, probably incense burner or fire burner, some sort of little little platform is one of the only non-utilitarian objects found. 70% of the pottery sherds are jars. 20% are jugs and juglets, practically nothing else, practically no cooking ware. So no evidence that this is domestic, no evidence that anybody lived here, or certainly it would have been a very uncomfortable living that they would have been doing here. The bones were originally burned in open-air fires at a low temperature, 200 to 600 degrees centigrade, according to analysis. Do not ask me how they know that. I have no idea. And the type of animals represented: young bulls, sheep, goat, and fallow deer. Inside that fill, inside that series of ashy fills that were excavated out of these open areas on either side of the ramp, was one datable object, a scarab from Egypt, dating from the period of the pharaohs Ramses II and III, so late 13th, early 12th centuries, anytime in there. That is to say, the beginning of Iron I. So here you see a reconstruction drawing of the altar, which it almost certainly was, on Mount Ebal. You see a bunch of stone circles here at ground level, immediately on bedrock in the two squares on either side of the ramp, but also in the area outside of the stone platform. And below it were a bunch of small stone circles, like fire circles, like what you make when you go camping, and you make a little circle out of stones to make your fire. And inside the circles were found the same kind of remains that were found inside the fill here, which is to say ash, dirt, broken pottery, and burned bone. So it looks like this is two phases. A first phase where there were a series of periodic rituals or ceremonies, cult activities that included sacrificing of animals, burning of animals, and then a more organized altar was constructed with a ramp that you could walk up, and the points of the corners of the altar are oriented to the cardinal points. The corners of the altar are oriented to the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, exactly, which is a feature that we know of from ancient Mesopotamian ziggurats and altars. The corners are oriented to the cardinal points. All right. Now you get to take a couple of minutes and write down as many things as you can, talk to whoever you want to talk to, sit next to you, about the culture, society, economy, the life of these new Iron I Highland settlers. How did they live? What were they like? Go.